You stand on the frozen bank of the Rubicon, the cold from the stones climbing through the soles of your boots and into your bones, and you stare at the dark water rushing toward a sea you cannot see. The news from Rome is a cold weight in your chest, the Senate's final decree delivered by a breathless Curio, stripping your command and naming you an enemy, and behind you, the 13th Legion waits in a silence deeper than the winter night. You close your eyes and the memory of Curio's arrival floods back, the young tribune's face pale with panic and the road dust of his desperate ride from Rome, his voice cracking as he recited the Senate's ultimatum while your officers stood frozen around the map table. You see Calpurnia's face from your last morning in the city, her hand on your arm and her eyes holding a silent plea she would not voice, and you feel the precise moment the world you built began to fracture. You open your eyes to the river and the bridge, and the faces of your men rise in your mind like ghosts from the mud of Gaul, Vorenus pulling your eagle standard from the carnage at Alesia, and the 10,000 others who bled for a general who promised them land and honor. You think of the law, the sacred boundary of your command that this river represents, and you weigh a lifetime of service against the single step that would shatter it forever, leaving only the cold arithmetic of betrayal or war. You turn your back on the water and face the legion, your gaze moving over the ranks of men whose breath hangs in clouds under the indifferent stars, and you see in their eyes not the blind obedience of soldiers, but the weary, patient trust of brothers who have crossed 100 rivers at your command. Vorenus meets your look with a slow, grim nod, his hand resting on his sword, and in that silent exchange you feel the terrible weight of their fate settling onto your shoulders alongside your own. The young tribune Curio steps forward from the shadows, his fine cloak stained and his aristocratic face a mask of frantic calculation, and he seizes your arm to whisper of treaties and legalities, of the optics of crossing with a legion while your remaining supporters in Rome still plead your case. Fool. His words are the last gasp of the old world, a world of procedure and debate that died the moment the Senate declared you hostis, and you let them fall into the frozen air unheard. You walk away from Curio, his whispered arguments dissolving like his breath in the cold, and you move toward the head of the column, where the bridge begins, each step on the frost-hardened earth feeling heavier than the last. The real argument is not with the tribune, but with the ghost of Pompey, whose shadow stretches from Rome to this riverbank, and you remember the shared consulship, the marriage alliance, and the slow, inevitable fracture that has led you both to this impossible edge. You stop at the first stone of the bridge, your hand gripping the cold, rough-hewn parapet, and you think of the civil wars that came before, of Sulla's prescription lists, and the heads of good men rotting on the rostra, the beast of factional strife you swore you would never unleash upon Rome. The river's dark rush below is the sound of that history, a warning you have studied your whole life, and now you stand poised to become its author. You look down at your hand on the stone, the knuckles white with cold and pressure, and you think of the letters you sent from Gaul, the offers of compromise that were returned with contempt, and the final demand for your surrender. You know the die was not cast here tonight, but was loaded and thrown in the Senate House by men who feared your veterans more than they loved the Republic. And this river is merely the table where it lands, its dark water whispering of consequences you can already feel in your bones. The tension in your chest is a coiled spring, a physical pressure that tightens with every beat of your heart, as you stand on the threshold of the bridge, and you feel the eyes of 5,000 men fixed on your back, waiting for a sign. You think of the farmlands you promised them beyond the Po, the plots of earth that mean more than any senator's decree, and you understand that to turn back now would be a betrayal deeper than any law you are about to break. You release the stone and take a single, deliberate step onto the bridge, the worn cobbles solid and final beneath your boot, and you feel the invisible line of your command dissolve like mist in the sudden, silent focus of the night. You do not look back at Gaul or at the faces of your men, but stare instead down the dark road that leads to Ariminum and then to Rome, and you understand that every path you have ever walked has converged on this frozen river and this single act. You stand at the center of the bridge with the cold river air moving your cloak, and you look down at the dark water rushing toward the sea that will carry your name into history for this moment alone, feeling the words of the gambler rise to your lips, not as a shout of defiance, but as a quiet, final acknowledgement to the night, which you whisper into the stillness. Alea iacta est, and the irrevocable truth of them settles in your bones like the cold. The whispered words hang in the air between you and the river, a private oath made to the darkness, and you turn slowly to face the legion, waiting on the northern bank. You raise your arm, not in a dramatic gesture, but in a simple, unmistakable signal, and you see the understanding pass through the ranks like a low current. The centurions turning to their men, and the first muffled clatter of gear as the great machine of your command begins to move toward you. You watch the first century of the 13th begin to cross, their hobnailed boots striking the ancient stones with a rhythmic, earth-trembling tread that is the only sound in the world, and you see Vorenus at their head, his eyes fixed on you as he leads them across the boundary that no Roman general has ever crossed under arms. The bridge groans under the weight of history and iron, and you feel the last tether to your old life snap clean through. You watch the last man of the 13th step from the bridge onto Italian soil, and the column reforms on the road south with a final, metallic rustle that is swallowed by the night. The crossing is done, but the act is not complete until you move, and you feel the eyes of 5,000 men waiting for the next command, their breath held like yours, the road ahead no longer a possibility, but a demand. You turn your back on the river, and the Rubicon is just a memory of rushing water behind you. You give the order to march, your voice calm and carrying in the frozen air, and the column begins to move south along the Via Flaminia with the grim, purposeful rhythm of a thing that can no longer be stopped. You walk at its head, the road unfolding before you like a scroll, and you think not of battles, but of the first town ahead, of the faces of its magistrates when they see the eagle standards of a Roman legion, where by law none should be. You march through the pre-dawn gloom, the road a pale ribbon under the fading stars, and the memory of your last crossing of this river returns with the clarity of a dream, when you were a young quester heading north with nothing but ambition and a borrowed horse. Now you return at the head of an army you built, and the quiet fields sleeping under frost on either side of the road feel like a held breath, waiting for the sun to reveal what you have done. The first gray light of dawn finds you still marching, the rhythmic sound of 5,000 boots, a drumbeat against the silence of the sleeping countryside, and you see the shapes of farmsteads begin to emerge from the gloom, their hearths cold and their doors shut tight against the unknown. You think of the farmers inside, men who know nothing of senatorial decrees or proconsular imperium, who will wake to find the world changed by the army passing their gate, and you wonder what name they will give you by noon. The sun breaks over the eastern hills, a cold, pale light that washes the frost-burned fields in gray, and you see the first sentry on the walls of Ariminum, a tiny dark figure who freezes at the sight of your column before vanishing to sound the alarm. You raise your hand to halt the legion, the sudden silence after hours of marching more deafening than the tread, and you wait for the gates to open or the arrows to fly, your fate now in the hands of a terrified town. The gates of Ariminum groan open, not with military defiance, but with the slow, reluctant surrender of a town that knows it cannot fight, and the magistrates emerge, wrapped in cloaks, against the dawn chill, their faces pale with a fear that is not of death, but of choosing the wrong side in a war that has just begun. They offer you the keys to the city without a word, their eyes avoiding yours and the silent, terrible judgment of the eagles at your back. You accept the keys of Ariminum with a nod, your hand closing over the cold iron, and you feel the first domino fall in the chain that will stretch all the way to the gates of Rome. You order the legion to bivouac outside the walls, a gesture of restraint that is also a calculation, because you need this town as a symbol of peaceful acquisition, not conquest, and you watch the magistrates scurry back inside like men escaping a storm they know is only beginning. You stand in the Forum of Ariminum as the sun climbs, the cold iron keys heavy in your hand, and you watch your legionaries set their camp with the quiet efficiency of men who have done it 1,000 times on soil that is now irrevocably home. You think of the letters you must write to Pompey and the Senate, each word a careful thread you will inscribe, while the sounds of the waking camp drift up to you like distant smoke. You walk through the newly established camp, the morning sun doing little to warm the air, and you see the faces of your men not as conquerors, but as weary travelers who have crossed a line they can never uncross, their quiet conversations a low hum of speculation about the road ahead and the families they left behind in Gaul. You find Vorenus inspecting a cart, his movements methodical and calm, and when he looks up at you, his eyes hold no question, only the patient readiness of a tool waiting for its use. You stand with Vorenus in the shadow of the cart, the cold morning air sharp in your lungs, and you tell him to send riders south, down every road with the news that Caesar has crossed the Rubicon and taken Ariminum without bloodshed, a message meant for the people and the garrisons who must now choose. He nods once, his scarred face impassive, and turns to carry the order, and you watch him go, knowing the words you have just unleashed will travel faster than any army and reshape the land before you. You watch the riders disappear down the southern roads, their hoofbeats fading into the morning, and you feel the news detach from you like a released bird, carrying your name and your crime ahead of the march to be judged in every forum and household. You turn back to the silent camp and the closed gates of the town, and you understand that you are no longer just a general with an army, but a fact, a new and terrible reality that Italy must now swallow or choke on. You walk to the edge of the camp, where the road south disappears into the winter haze, and you think of the messengers racing ahead with your name, a name that is no longer just a man, but a declaration of war that will find Pompey in Capua and Cicero in his villa. You feel the momentum of your act, a great stone beginning to roll on its own, and you know the next move is theirs, and you must be ready for whatever form their panic takes. You stand at the road's edge until the last rider vanishes, and then you walk back through the quiet camp toward your command tent. The weight of the keys to Ariminum, a cold reminder that you have exchanged the clean danger of a battlefield for the murky politics of occupation. Inside the tent, you sit before a blank parchment, the stylus in your hand feeling heavier than a sword, and you begin the letter to Pompey that will be either an offer of peace or a declaration of war in ink. You write the letter to Pompey with the cold precision of a siege engineer, your stylus carving words of wounded dignity and iron resolve onto the parchment, and you seal it with your ring, the wax taking the impression of your family crest like a brand on a treaty. You hand it to a courier whose face is pale in the lamplight, and you order him to ride as if the Furies are at his heels, because the first move in the war of words must land before Pompey can shape the story from the shock. You watch the courier vanish into the pre-dawn gloom with your sealed words, and you sit alone in the tense silence, the sounds of the waking camp a distant murmur beyond the leather walls. You think of the road ahead, of the towns and armies waiting, and you understand the step on the bridge was only the beginning of a longer, darker crossing. You stand, push the tent flap aside, and call for Vorenus, your voice cutting the cold air with the order to break camp and march.